Every once in a while, someone comes into your life and they inspire you, or they challenge you, or they encourage you. And even if they don't change the course of your life, they're there, right? Their story, their strength of character, their experience stays with you. And that was my experience when I was pastoring in Toronto. I had the joy and the pleasure of meeting Erinn Oxford. I was at her ordination where I heard her story, her personal story and her journey in her ministry when her church went through quite a transition. You could say beauty out of ashes. And we're in this series, This Is Us, and we've been hearing stories, Mark's story, my story, there'll be some other stories coming up. And although Erinn's not one of us here at Lakeside, she is one of us in the whole community of faith, the global family of Jesus. And so I just want to invite her up this morning to inspire you. I have just been so excited that she's going to come because I just know you're going to be inspired, challenged maybe, encouraged. And so I just want to welcome Erinn this morning. Bless you.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Robin, for that really lovely welcome. As Robin mentioned, I've been invited to really share my story with you, and so I'm going to begin with just a bit of my own life, and then that will lead into the work that I do, and you'll probably notice how they're all intertwined. I'm really grateful, first of all, to be here with you all today. I know that for almost all of you, I am a stranger, and so I do think it's important to begin by telling you about myself, by sharing some of my story, and I hope that in doing so, you will better understand the context out of which I live. I hope that you will hear that I am a believer and lover of community and how relationships deeply matter to me. I hope that you will sense my faith, something that I can't imagine my life without. I hope you will hear my acknowledgement that while life is a difficult roller coaster, it can only make any kind of sense to me because of God. In Jesus, I find hope. My challenges are too heavy to carry and too deep to undo on my own. But in Christ, I have found a future. So in every area of my life, I desire to share this hope and joy. So I remember standing on a chair so that I could see what was going on in the front of this room. I was small, only in kindergarten. My mother was beside me, holding my hand so that I wouldn't topple off the chair. We were at Grace and Peace, the church, the little church plant that met in a rented space, surrounded by people who were a part of recently exposing my mom to Jesus. It might sound surprising, but that actually was the day that I decided I wanted to also know God. In a way, I cannot recall a time when I didn't believe. My mom often described her own experience of discovering Jesus as one where she was moving toward a great light. As a result of her profound faith, I wanted to form my own. So I was born to Elaine and Barry Grant in Toronto. When I was 4 years old, we were joined by my brother Logan. While I was in grade 2, my parents made the difficult decision to divorce. They gathered us into our living room and explained that decision. The impact of that event has been long-lasting on me. As a child with people-pleasing and perfectionistic tendencies, I wanted to fix things. Though my father did not intend to leave me or my brother, it felt as though he had. I do acknowledge, though, that as hard a situation as that was, my parents did a remarkable job of remaining kind to one another and working hard to take care of us. I was always an eager student. I discovered music at a young age. I sang at every opportunity I could get. Our church nurtured that desire in me to be a musician, even allowing me in those early days to play the piano very clumsily, I'm sure, during services. Our church took care of me, my mother and brother in other ways too. Now a single parent, my mom needed the spiritual and practical support of others. Though my father continued to provide for us financially, I know that our rent was often paid for by the church. It became common for our living room to be full of people gathered to pray. While cast in a little play in my elementary school, I found what I thought would be my life's call, which at the time was musical theater. I wholeheartedly pursued it, worked in the industry, and then planned to do a Bachelor of Fine Arts in musical theater at York University. But then in the August, before the fall I was set to go, I felt completely unsettled. One night, I went to visit a friend at what is now Tyndale, but then it was Ontario Bible College and Ontario Theological Seminary, and left convinced that I needed to defer my acceptance to York and instead attend it. In that moment, I felt completely turned upside down. None of it made sense to me. How could what I had been working so hard for suddenly seem the wrong fit? I didn't have the answer. I did decide, though, to listen to the voice inside me that said it was okay to explore something else. My Tyndale years proved to be life-altering. I found opportunity to be mentored by a variety of people. I became friends with my future husband. I also met two fellow students who had lived experience on the street and were now encouraging others to engage in urban ministry. At their invitation, I decided to do what they were calling a street walk. So one night, we went downtown armed with bagged lunches for people who were in obvious need. What was completely disarming about the experience was how comfortable I immediately felt. I had grown up in affluent North Toronto, where I rarely faced the reality of homelessness, surrounded by a church that never allowed my family to go without. Suddenly, I was sitting with people in the underground parking lot of a Royal Bank Plaza, in makeshift cardboard houses, and feeling at home. I slowly became aware of God's call on my life to accompany people in the margins. I learned that rather than forget music, it could be infused into this new life. My studies impacted a developing philosophy of ministry, one that incorporated the Beatitudes, which say blessedness is found in broken places. Outside at night, in alleys, down stairwells, and under bridges, I touched and experienced Jesus, the one who went before me and was already present in such unexpected places. I married Dion Oxford in 1998. Together with our now 20-year-old daughter, Kate, we have chosen to form deep roots in Toronto, working in a variety of urban ministry settings. For the last 15 plus years, I've worked in Parkdale. There, I have worked as an advocate for people who know poverty. With their help, I can honestly say that I have come to understand my own. So I am no stranger to struggle. Dion was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, a degenerative autoimmune disease that it sounds like some people are gonna buy burgers for. Shortly before we were married, we were engaged. While we have sought to not allow MS to define us, it has admittedly deeply impacted our journey. Almost 2 years ago, I had to take Dion to the hospital. That crisis led to him permanently living in long-term care. My father died suddenly and unexpectedly in 2008. My mother died in May of 2017 after having lived in hospital for more than 13 years due to the complications from the removal of a non-malignant brain tumor. I see on an almost everyday basis the results of serious trauma in the lives of my community. I am now the executive director and pastor of the Dale Ministries, a community in the west end of Toronto once known as Parkdale Neighborhood Church, PNC for short. Just over a decade ago, I became the only staff. We had to face a very difficult realization at the time. Our funding had run its course. I was asked to come up with a strategic plan, one that might revision, reimagine, rebuild how we exist in the neighborhood. The irony was that though we were flourishing as a community, we did not have the resources to continue paying rent, taking care of maintenance, or even paying for internet access. I want to read from 1 John. That which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we have looked at and our hands have touched, this we proclaim concerning the word of life. The life appeared, we have seen it and testify to it, and we proclaim to you the eternal life, which was with the Father and has appeared to us. We proclaim to you that we have seen and heard, so that you also may have fellowship with us. And our fellowship is with the Father and his Son, Jesus Christ. We write this to make our joy complete. In this first chapter of 1 John, we are reminded that Christ was God manifested in the flesh, that John and now we have fellowship with the Father, and Jesus can therefore have fellowship with one another, and that there is a fullness of joy that occurs because of all of this. Today, I am also here to testify to the work that is happening through the Dale Ministries. My desire is that it might serve as encouragement to you, the community of Lakeside Church. The people of the Dale remind me on a daily basis of the presence of Jesus, a presence that, to use the words of John, I see and touch and experience fellowship in. I suspect that as I share stories of experiencing Jesus, that maybe stories of your own might be triggered. So approximately 2 years ago, he walked into our drop-in, a tall man with broad shoulders, a guitar slung across his back, a fistful of rings with skulls on them, and a pretty intense attitude. I learned that he liked to be called Snake Man because his only friends were the 4 snakes that he shared a small rooming house apartment with. Snake Man was obviously intrigued by what was going on. And I remember standing there and he sort of towers over me. And he said, "What is this place?" And I answered, "We're the Dale, and you're welcome to stay." Just not that many years before Snake Man's arrival, the Dale, as I mentioned, was called PNC. On a sunny day near the end of June, I had to remove the PNC sign from the door and the gate at 201 Cowan Avenue, the address that had been ours since 2006. For me, this act made things official. PNC no longer had its own building. We had faced, as I mentioned earlier, this hard realization our funding had run its course. I became the only staff and was asked to come up with some kind of strategic plan. The irony, again, is that though we were flourishing as a community, we didn't have the resources. We had had a single donor who had covered really our entire budget, who needed to put us on what they called their declining formula. And that declining formula was rapid. Now, the reason we didn't have money is because we are a varied group. Most of us live rough outside, some of us in rooming houses, and a few in houses of our own. Some of us are struggling with addiction to street drugs or alcohol or television or social media or too much food. Some of us have diagnosed mental health challenges ranging from anxiety and depression, which is something many people are familiar with, all the way through to paranoid schizophrenia. Some of us are refugees. We range in age. I like to say we're a motley crew, one that in large part knows what it is to be shunned and pushed away because we smell like the street. The truth is, many people have selected us as the unlovable. Some of my own most prized possessions are ones that look well-worn, have tiny fingerprints on them, or have even been broken at one time, but are too precious to discard. Similarly, my closest relationships are with people who are willing to show me their true selves, the selves that struggle and who allow me to show my own true self and still love me. In an effort to silence those voices that declare us unlovable, we acknowledge our common humanity. We know we have struggles and choose again and again and again to journey alongside one another toward deeper wholeness in Jesus. So during PNC's time of crisis, I found myself thinking of seeds. We commit seeds to the darkness of the earth in order for a new plant to emerge. I knew that we needed to commit PNC to what poet John O'Donohue calls the ancient symmetry of growth. Root further into darkness and rise towards the sun. The prophet Zechariah says, "For there will be peace for the seed. The vine will yield its fruit, the land will yield its produce, and the heavens will give their due. And I will cause this remnant of people to inherit all these things." Now, planting a seed and waiting for it to grow does demand one to be patient. A waiting person is a patient person. The word patience means the willingness to stay where we are and live out the situation to the full in the belief that something hidden there will manifest itself to us, said Henry Nouwen. The prophet Habakkuk knew something of this kind of patience. When struggling with God's apparent absence, Habakkuk was told to do the following: write down the vision on the tablets so that one can read it readily, for the vision still has its time, presses on to fulfillment, and will not disappoint. If it delays, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not be late. And so to thwart doubt and prevent despair, I had to contemplate the original vision of God's loving promise, the one that had captured my heart so much earlier in my life. I had to contemplate the paradoxical life of Jesus, the one where being king meant dying on a cross. I wrote down the vision and promise. I read it. I committed it to memory. I had to look for it and wait for it, attempting to be patient, and at the same time expecting it to arrive. It was not easy. So fast forward to the present. PNC is now known as the Dale Ministries. We have grown and are growing into something new. On that sunny day when I took down those signs, we became a church without our own walls. I like to say it was the day that we spilled into the street. That day marked the beginning of reimagining our vision. You might wonder why we would seemingly shift away from church by changing our name. I'd like to say that while we are very much church, we do not function in a formal or more traditional church way. We are not made sufficient based on tithing. I do want to explicitly say, though, that our people give generously, just sometimes out of their very little, and oftentimes with various other things, even a handful of change. We came exceedingly close to ceasing to exist because of this. So playing with the language that had become a barrier to our long-term stability was worth it. At the beginning of our search for a new name, I decided to ask the community what PNC had meant to them. They said a number of words, but the number one word was that we were safe. I don't know that we can ever promise full safety, but safe enough. And so we decided on the Dale, because a dale is a valley that cuts through a mountain, and it's where you go to be safe during a storm. You don't stand on top of the mountain waiting to be hit by lightning. You go into the dale. And it's reminiscent of our neighborhood, Parkdale. So every day, the Dale Ministries endeavors to be a safe community for many, including me. We do this by extending an invitation to come as you are and to participate in both giving and receiving. So how does it work? I like to say that we've become nomads with a schedule. When we spilled into the street, I started to knock on the doors of buildings around our neighborhood because I knew that there were buildings that were underused during the week. And so I said, would you be willing to allow us to run one of our programs in your space? So we have sort of a pre-COVID schedule and a post-COVID schedule. What I will say is that even through COVID, we never stopped. We were able to remain on the front line throughout. Before, we would always have a drop-in on a Monday where we would invite 120 to 150 people to come and eat together. What was unique about the Dale, though, is that making that meal happened together with members of the core community. The room would be set up, the food would be cooked, the dishes would be done after, all with people from our core. Now, those meals are still to go, which is not our style, but something that we've had to do. We have an art drop-in a health center, Parkdale Queen West Community Health Center. We do a lunch to go, we do a breakfast to go, we do a lot of street outreach. We have a Bible study in a Franciscan-run restaurant where you can get a good meal for $1. We are all over the neighborhood. So many people ask me, what is not having a building like? Is it hard? Would you buy one if you had a huge influx of money? And I can honestly say that there are cons to not having a space of our own, but for us at the Dale, the pros outweigh them. It was an opportunity for a community that understood transience to teach me about what that looked like. I was relieved when the move out of our space was finally done. The amount of stuff that had accumulated was, at least for me, astonishing. As we purged almost all of our belongings and packed just a few, I became thankful for the freedom from things. I remember reading this: you gain confidence through knowing that I am with you, that you face nothing alone. Anxiety stems from asking the wrong question. If such and such happens, can I handle it? The true question is not whether you can cope with whatever happens, but whether you and I can handle anything that occurs. Becoming underhoused was an opportunity for me to discover if I was asking the right question. That was scary. For as right as I believe it was, it also came as a loss, especially for people who don't have spaces of their own. In response to the question, what is something that makes you sad? One of our youngest community members drew a picture of many stick people carrying a large box. She said she felt sad that the people were carrying away her church. It was indeed what was happening in the eyes of that little person. It was important to honor that sadness. I didn't want to belittle the magnitude of the change. I joined with others in weeping a lot. I also had to persist in announcing that as a community, we could exist outside of a building. And so I'm here to say this morning that we are still a community, and that yes, though church is no longer in our name, we very much function as one. We continue to gather, to support, to create, to eat together, to question, to pray, to worship, to dance, to love. By spilling into the streets, we fully inhabit our neighborhood, or at least more fully inhabit it. By inviting people to financially support our work, which we had to do. We had to build a fundraising model, which includes all of our salaries. We no longer rely on a single source for our livelihood. By knocking on the doors of our neighbors, we have found space, though it sometimes revolves, to run our programs. Oftentimes, we don't have keys for those spaces, but it costs us very little, or in some cases, nothing. We have the opportunity to be shown hospitality at the same time as giving it. So Snake Man decided to stick around. Our journey together has been up and down, but increasingly very up. He arrived at the Dale unaccustomed to community, especially one that he wouldn't get kicked out of. We've experienced his intense anger and struggle with alcohol. We've been close when he got evicted from that rooming house he was first living in, which turned out to be an illegal rooming house. We helped him find housing and moved all of his stuff. Now Snake Man, who along the way revealed that his name is Doug, is at every single thing we do. He knows he is loved. He prays and plays the guitar at our worship service. He has a guitar that he calls his God-tar and puts stickers on the, on the front of it. He says he's becoming a healthier person, and he knows I'm telling this story and is happy for me too, and he's right. One patient little step at a time he is. God is transforming Doug. So the Dale did what many describe as the unimaginable by becoming a church without our own building. In the context of this little struggling church community, we are reminded of God's presence. I am, Doug is too. God has seen fit to multiply the loaves and fishes in Parkdale, and I mean this literally, on days when there shouldn't have been any money to purchase food for our drop-in, we somehow had full plates and people were taking food home. I am no longer the only staff. I was joined by community workers, Joanna Moon, Megan Knight, and Olivia Scott, surrounded by a community that has heard that invitation to full participation. The ancient symmetry of growth that I mentioned earlier is powerfully embodied in the great poise of the trees. A life that wishes to honor its own possibility has to learn too how to integrate the suffering of dark and bleak times into a dignity of presence. Letting go of old forms of life, a tree practices hospitality towards new forms. It balances perennial energies of winter and spring within its own living bark. The tree, John O'Donohue concludes, can reach toward the light, endure wind, rain, and storm, precisely because it is rooted. just over a decade into this wild experiment, the tree that is the Dale still exists. May the work of the Dale and of Lakeside Church be firmly rooted. Join me in prayer. Help us, O God, to be attentive to your call, to the places you ask us to go. Help us to be seeds that produce your fruit. Help us, O God, to patiently wait for you and to experience hope in the most unexpected of places. Today, may this community, may we in community experience confidence in Christ and be refreshed. And may the desire for the joy of fellowship intensify. Amen.
Oh, well, I hope you're as inspired and encouraged as I am, that there is always hope, and that we worship a God of resurrection. And so I just have a question for you, Erinn, as we close out. You are a minister on the front lines, but you are also a pastor who, for a while, pastored what we would consider a traditional church functioning in a building. As you have transitioned into the ministry that you're in now, what challenge do you have for the church in North America? What would be your challenge to us and to them, if you have one?
Well, I do, and I give credit, though, to a longtime friend and mentor named Rick Tobias, who is no longer alive, but was the CEO of Young Street Mission for many years. And he and I spoke frequently about this. And we would say that the two things where we can build credibility in this world as a church are, one, in our unity, that we need to actually find the ways that we're more alike than we are different. And two, it is in the way that we take care of each other in our poverty. And so what Rick was really good at was describing the different kinds of poverty that people experience. And the reality is that we all do, right? It looks different for each of us. I sometimes say that our community at the Dale, their challenges are worn very close to the surface, and in a way that they can't hide them even if they wanted to. And that my challenges are no less there. They just, maybe I have the capacity to manage them. And so the challenge is to open up to each other and to share in that common humanity, and to show the world that we are a people that are transformed by hope, not by ourselves.
Thank you. Thank you. Friends, as we seek to build Oasis here, those are good words. Those are good words. We long to be a place that is safe, that is authentic and vulnerable, and aware that each of us carry our own version of poverty and that we need each other. So Erinn, thank you so much for joining us today. Could I just ask you to stand as we just close out our service? I'd love to send you off with a blessing. Our prayer team will be at the front, Brenda and Margaret. If you want prayer for anything, or you just want them to pray a blessing over you. May the strength of God sustain you. May the power of God preserve you. May the hands of God protect you. May the way of God direct you. And may the love of God go with you. Bless you, friends. We love you. Have a great Sunday.